Hello, everyone, and welcome to a webinar about how to build a classroom culture that is anti-bullying. Now, I wanted to introduce myself first. I'm Monica Brady-Meyerov, the founder and CEO of Listenwise, and we'll be sharing some great audio resources about bullying that you can use in your classroom. And I'm here with a colleague, Mary Hender from Facing History. Do you want to introduce yourself, Mary?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm the program director for Los Angeles and really for Southern California. And I'm really excited for the partnership that we have with Listenwise and for giving teachers some great resources for how to set up their classroom culture and how to have tough conversations in the classroom.
And remind everyone that October is National Bullying Month, and this is a perfect time to focus on creating positive classroom culture. So in this webinar, you'll learn how to build empathy in your classroom to better create a bullying-free environment. You'll also learn how to talk about what bullying is and how it impacts others. You'll also learn how to support someone who's being bullied or create a positive response to bullying. So we're going to bring together audio storytelling from public radio on Listenwise because we are a resource that curates public radio for the classroom and helps you find these great stories. And we're going to combine it with teaching resources on Facing History and ourselves so that you can leave this webinar feeling like you know how to create a safe and reflective classroom. First, I want to talk a little bit about listening and how it builds understanding. So if you think about why do we listen to stories so much and how does listening stimulate and even change our brains? Well, researchers who study how audio and radio affect attention and memory believe that listening requires more from your brain. It is something that's happening when you're listening to a story rather than reading it. You're processing the information at the same rate it's being presented. But you're also listening to often to many different voices, perspectives, emotions. And all of this is making your brain work really hard to pull together all the things you're hearing in order to understand what you're listening to. So a number of researchers believe in a concept called immersed experience theory. And it means that understanding language when you're listening is akin in some ways to actually being there and experiencing the events the language describes. So the evidence shows that people are simulating what it would be like to be in a scene when they're listening. So imagine how this can translate into a story about bullying or hearing someone's response to bullying or how they feel about bullying. Seeing somebody in those shoes, in that scene, can be very, very powerful. And this all makes sense when you think about the neuroscience involved when you're listening, because your brain is making a movie, and it's including the sights and smells and sounds of everything that's happening. The other thing that we know about listening is that it's a pathway to empathy. Listening to stories out loud as a group builds empathy. There's research that shows that. So when you're thinking about creating a responsive classroom to bullying, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to be building empathy among your students. So listening to stories about bullying could be an excellent way to do that. Another thing I want to point out is that storytelling is also so powerful. So rather than talking about, a bullet list of why bullying can be detrimental and how to confront bullying, telling a good story has the power to captivate students. And stories told aloud allow the listener to connect emotionally to the people speaking. So audio can really move students emotionally, make them feel something. And it helps students put themselves in somebody else's shoes, make them really feel that experience. The belongingness theory states that people listen to emotional information, i.e. stories, out of a desire to experience social connection. So listening decreases our social anxiety and increases our psychological safety. And that's exactly the environment you can create in your classroom by sharing stories about bullying and then leading discussions afterwards. So I want to go now to Listenwise and play a little clip of exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share a story with you now, part of a story about the psychology of a bully. And this is an interview with someone who was a bully and who also was a victim of bullying, was on both sides of the bullying equation, if you will. And we're going to listen to this and then talk a little bit about it. So here we go.
It takes a certain person to cause pain to others. This person could be me, you, or really anyone. There has been a moment in everyone's life when they've been cruel, when they've been a bully. My parents, friends, and teachers would be absolutely shocked to hear that I had been a bully at least once in my life, because I'm the polar opposite today. I felt the same feeling of surprise when I heard Alice, a senior from Casco Bay High School, story. This was back in 5th grade. I used to bully this girl named Susan. I remember this one time that at the end of the recess, all the kids lined up to go inside. And what I did, I just went up there and just pulled her skirt down in front of the whole class. Back then, like, I wasn't even thinking. I was just having fun. That's all you think is, like, you're awesome and that's it. Like, you don't, like, think about how the other person's life is. So much you think about yourself and what's next to do to, like, be cooler.
Trying to be cool is something that all bullies share, says Professor of Psychology at the University of Maine, Cynthia Ardley.
Oftentimes, when people choose to bully, part of it is to elevate their own social status. And many times, unfortunately, bullies get reinforced for their behavior, reinforced by the peer group. And that reinforcement doesn't necessarily have to be like cheering and going along with the bully. It can even be just ignoring what the bully's doing and letting it happen and giving the bully some kind of power in the peer group.
Not only did she bully to gain peer status, Alice bullied for this reason as well.
We used to just have a group, and I used to be the leader. So I pretty much kicked this girl out of the group because she dressed different than we did. I'm going to stop the story there. It goes on to talk more about her justifications for bullying, but also gets into why she felt like she was an outcast, that Alice targeted outcast because she was one herself. And I think I'm going to turn, I know we have a teacher, a facing history teacher with us, Jennifer, on the line, and I want to ask Jennifer, why is this kind of, why is this kind of story important for students to hear, do you think?
So I'm actually in this, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I'm actually an assistant principal, so I come at it from that angle, but I used facing history in my history class when I taught middle school. So I'm currently at a middle school. I think sometimes the word bully gets used inappropriately and gets, kids get put in the box as being a bully without the understanding that at any given time, we could be the bully and be the bullied, depending on, if like I know this person who's talking in the story, the student in the story is in high school and she's like, no one would consider me the bully because of who I am now. And I think there's a continuum, there's a spectrum of this. So no one gets locked into being a bully forever. And so I think kids need to hear somebody talking through bad choices that they made at any given time and being characterized as something, and then growing out of that and not growing out of it with age necessarily, but just growing into somebody different so that they don't always feel like they have the label on them or they're not permanently placing that label on other people. I don't know if that makes much sense.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to share. Thank you for that. And I'm going to pass it now over to Mary to pick up on some of those themes.
Great. And I will say that I also have the chat function open. So if anybody is here and wants to share other ideas in the chat, please feel free to do that as well. So as Monica says, these stories are so powerful, and it's, I think, particularly powerful for young people to hear from their peers about their own experience. But it takes a strong degree of vulnerability for young people and for adults to really open up and share as honestly as those stories on Listenwise. So I think one of the things that's really important that Facing History works with our teachers in our schools is how do you first establish that space where that openness can happen. And when I'm talking about the openness and vulnerability, it is both, the individuals in the class starting to share those stories, but also like having that space where you could play that kind of story and have students really engage seriously with it, and not either just laugh because they're uncomfortable, or can make fun of the situation when it's a very serious situation other students may have experienced as well. So when we talk about what a safe and reflective classroom is, we're talking about these 5 bullets that are on the slide, that it's a classroom that creates a sense of trust and openness, that students are encouraged to speak and listen to each other, that there's time and there's space for that reflection that can often start with a journal and then go into talking. That students are offered multiple avenues for participation, whether it's writing things down that others may read, or small groups, or whole class discussion, or other ways that students can be engaged. And it's really helping students to appreciate the points that other classmates may bring up, the contributions, in some ways tying straight from that Listenwise story, the feeling that they might be outcasts. It comes in part because students don't feel like they are valued. So how do we create that space in the classroom where students can recognize that they are valued? And the 2 guides that I have pictured on this slide are some specific areas that we have that can help in those areas, both thinking about how you might foster empathy by looking directly at bullying, and then by thinking about what do we do with civil discourse today, since we're trying to create this atmosphere for students to feel comfortable sharing and reflecting and learning, but that isn't always what they see adults having, or doing in their life. And so thinking about ways that we more explicitly teach those skills to our students so that they're ready for it. And one of the things that we often do for that on the next slide is by setting up a classroom contract. And in this kind of example, it's something that students co-construct with the teacher. So when I was teaching, my classroom contract was posted, but it was different for each period because each period had a different way of sharing some of the ideas that were important to them. And that something like that sets the tone right at the beginning that students' voices matter, that they are part of constructing and really owning this classroom. And it really gets their buy-in that they are going to help keep their peers focused on these ideas that were really important. So this slide shows one sample of what that might include. But I wanted to turn back to Jen as well, both as when you were in the classroom as a teacher, and now as an administrator, when you're helping teachers think about how to create a classroom that's conducive to learning and to students feeling valued and able to participate. What are some of the other things that you have found really valuable?
I think we talk a lot about social emotional learning for our students, because that's a big focus for my principal and for our school at this time, kind of supporting kids in that. And part of that is creating the spaces in the classroom for them to make connections with the adults in the room. So we encourage teachers to start the year with a getting to know activity rather than just jumping right into a syllabus, and encouraging teachers to be open as well in that. That one is probably the hardest part of guiding teachers to build this kind of classroom environment where kids feel comfortable sharing. Because I know my role in the classroom is always, if I'm going to ask my students to do it, then I will do it as well. So, but we have a lot of teachers who aren't quite there yet with the level of comfort in sharing personal stuff. And we're not and a lot of it, just in a conversation with a teacher I had last week, where it's not that you're turning your classroom into a therapy session, you're just making it a safe space. That's 2 different things. And you can make it a safe space by letting them know you a little bit as a person, and so that you can get to know them as people as well. So and in middle school, the safety, and they want to build connections and relationships with the adults they see. So really just talking people through at their level of comfort on how they do that. So I have some people who do a contract like you did, Mary, and then we have some people who just are continuously building those conversations and those spaces with kids just because they do it naturally, you know? It's just very organic for them.
And I'm hearing in that comment also, Jen, the importance that, I mean, the teacher also needs to be part of this classroom community and show a little bit of vulnerability. And it doesn't mean that we tell our entire life story, but that there is that element that we're showing that even as an adult, we're human. We may make mistakes. We may not know everything. And there's something that can feel very vulnerable to a teacher to do that. But I think you're right that it's so important in creating that sense of community where students will also open up.
Right. And I feel like we do something that you guys might know called Challenge Day. We do that 3 times a year with 3 different groups of kids. Are you guys familiar with Challenge Day?
Go ahead and explain it for those who may not be familiar.
Okay. Challenge Day is an organization that comes in and does a day-long, I don't know if it's a seminar, I don't know what to call it. It's an experience for kids, about 100 kids with about 30 adults in the room, kind of guiding kids to really understand how to build empathy and relationships with kids on campus and building connections rather with kids on campus they may not know they've had. So you get a mix of kids in the room who are student leaders, who are popular, like student leaders, like we would recognize them as leaders, and also leaders amongst peers. You know, it kind of runs the gamut. We try and get a real blend of kids in there. And the experience kind of, you know, they build community and they're, you know, they put you in small groups with an adult and you talk about, you know, you kind of have some of these hard conversations with kids about how they see themselves at school and what they see, what they bring from home. Like they have a very guided question process. And then the culminating kind of like the big event that most kids remember when they do it is they do one of those cross the line activities where they make statements. And so the adults have to do that as well. And so that's kind of a very public way, I think, of building this empathy piece, but it's kind of our cornerstone here at my school. And those kids will, you know, the 100 kids will continually come up to you and build those relationships throughout the year because you were in that room with them, having that experience. So we try and do that and have as many classroom teachers in there so they can build those connections, but really just talking about teachers that on the smaller scale every day, having those common experiences that they can connect to with their kids. Again, not because you're disclosing deep, dark secrets and not like a therapy session, but just like Mary, like you said, like acknowledging fault and acknowledging how people change over time and maybe sharing their own middle school experience with kids so that they know that people grow and become different. But that also, that vulnerability makes kids more likely to come to that adult and seek support or just help with kind of navigating middle school in this case.
Nice.
That's your question.
And that cross the line activity is one that's written up on the Facing History website. So I'll make sure
right. I've done it in various modalities myself in different trainings. So
yeah. So I'll make sure I'll add that link at the end of the webinar as well. And wanted to kind of use that to highlight one of the other things that's important is that like building empathy is not like a one-shot thing. And you know, as all of us have kind of said in different points, there's different ways, but it's really interweaving that throughout the throughout the school year. And so wanted to just reference, you know, some of the guides that are available from Facing History. We think it's really important that throughout the curriculum, we're building empathy by bringing in the stories of ordinary people. And no matter what the content is, that we're looking at ordinary individuals. And I wanted to share one that comes from the Holocaust and Human Behavior case study, which really is like it's our core case study, but it is much bigger than the Holocaust itself. That's why the human behavior part is really in there. And so the piece that I've chosen is from the final chapter that looks at choosing to participate. And it describes an incident that happened at a school. In this case, it was at a high school in Canada. And there was a 9th grade boy who came to school on his first day of school wearing a pink polo shirt. And, you know, if you can just imagine and put yourself in that feeling of 9th grade, high school, and you're trying to kind of establish yourself and think about what that might mean for this young boy. And on the next page I have, or next slide, I have just a little bit of an excerpt from it that as we might have guessed, bullies harassed him. They called him a homosexual. They threatened to beat him up. And there were two 12th grade seniors, two seniors that heard it and decided it was time to take action. And so you see there, one of them said, I just figured enough was enough. They went to a nearby discount store and bought 50 pink shirts, including tank tops, to wear to school the next day. Then the two went online to email classmates to get them on board with their anti-bullying cause that they dubbed a Sea of Pink. And I just imagine this young freshman coming to school now this next day. So after the first day where he was harassed and felt outcast and targeted, this next day where there's this sea of pink led by seniors at school, and what a difference that must have made for that one student, but also for all of the students at that school who saw this happen and saw that someone who would have been an outcast was completely enveloped by the school community saying it's not okay to bully this boy. And I think it's really important to have those kind of stories as well for our students to hear, because it's easy sometimes to hear the violent stories or the negative stories, but these stories of students, young people who have chosen to take positive action can also really be inspiring for young people to think about their own agency.
Yeah, Mary, I agree. It's a good time to share one of these stories that we have on our site, because it adds an element of the voice to this, and it is a positive response to bullying that is very similar to this case, in the sense that it was a girl in high school who came to school wearing pigtails, and she was bullied for wearing pigtails and was very distressed by it, and came home and her mother didn't know what to do, and she felt, like she lacked power. But she turned it around by going onto social media and asking for help, which is a wonderful way to do it. And I'm going to pick up in this conversation because I want to just go to the point where she became empowered to ask for help and what happened when she did. So I'm going to just jump to the conversation. This is with an interviewer asking Maisie, who was a young woman who was bullied, how she turned to Facebook to get help. So let me just go to this point in the story, and then we'll pick it up there. Here we go.
Radiant and energy. So it's like a really, really hopeful teenager. So Maisie took action. She went to Facebook, but she didn't just rant. Here's the rest of that status update.
This was the last straw for me. I know pigtails are ridiculous looking and often don't look the best on 15 and 16-year-olds, but please, if you could help my cause and so many other girls who have had hurtful things said to them, wear pigtails tomorrow. If you can't or won't, please tell others about my experience and ask them to please wear pigtails. Thank you so much for reading and sharing.
And so you sort of put out this call for people to wear pigtails as a demonstration of anti-bullying.
Yes.
Who showed up with pigtails at school?
Oh my gosh, everyone. I was sitting in front of the entranceway and I was crying because there was just so many people I didn't know, people I'd always looked up to, the most popular seniors, the most popular juniors. And I knew that a lot of them weren't just wearing them for me, but because everyone's had hurtful things said to them. All the girls understood. Even boys came in wearing them. Adults came in wearing them.
The Washington Post says that a teacher and even a dog.
Yes, even a dog.
Had pigtails.
Yes.
So funny. The first thing that struck my mind when I heard about this is like, wouldn't a lot of people say, whoa, actually Facebook is the totally wrong place for you to talk about this at all, because so much bullying does happen on Facebook.
Right, but I think it's a good tool. If they're going to use it to bully, why don't I use it to, send a message of support for other people and kind of get some support for myself with the bullying incident? Because with social media, you should use it not only against people, but to your advantage.
So I'll stop the interview there. I really encourage you to go and listen to the whole story, because it's amazing to hear it in her own voice. I think what this does is it's a very similar story to the one that Mary shared, but when you hear her excitement and exuberance about what positive response she got to this plea for help, and how it made her feel. You can just feel that emotion and excitement cursing through her voice. So I think that's what hearing the story from an actual person who's experienced a bullying event can help, I think, bring a lot of empathy and understanding in your classroom.
So we started a list of kind of things that people might do to stand up to bullying based on the things we've already talked about. So you see some of those things here in bullets, and you see some empty bullets because we know that others may have some different ideas. And we're nearing the end of the webinar itself, so I don't know that we can spend too much time on this, but wanted to allow if there's somebody else who wanted to share other ideas for what young people might do, to either put it in the chat box or go ahead and say it on the webinar.
Mary, I'd chime in and just say that that contract that you build up is something that I think helps people stand up to bullying if they've had a discussion about what are the acceptable norms in class and what aren't, that it would help so much to be able to stand up, to have known rules of behavior in your classroom as a thing, something to turn to.
Absolutely. And I see Jen put into the box, build a group of allies, peers, and adults. And I think that's really important as well, to think about who else can be part of it. There's a great phrase that I have often turned to that says, like, the process of deciding happens long before the moment of decision. And I think that can be, really important thing, to give students that space to think through what they might do before they're in that moment. Some other things coming up in the chat box is to be an ally, and when in doubt, to ask for help from an ally. And students don't always know that based on the research, peer contact is in many cases more powerful than a comment from an adult. So sometimes students think, oh, I can't do anything because it's the teacher's responsibility or the administrator's responsibility. But in many cases, a student hearing something from another student, finding that safe way to say, hey, like, that's not really cool, or hey, I've been there too. Right? Those comments from peers make an incredible impact, and that has been shown in multiple studies as well. So helping students recognize that they do have power in these situations.
And if I will,
Yeah,
so one of the frustrations in my job is that parents aren't as educated as we would like them to be, because they hear this word bullying just everywhere. And their immediate thing is, if my child comes home and tells me they're being bullied, I'm afraid they're going to kill themselves. We have people like one instance and they go right to that. So I think there's a piece for parents to understand. And often when they come in to my office, I kind of explain our procedures for how we follow up. But I look them and they say, well, we don't want this to ever happen again. And I say, neither do I, but I can't make that promise, because some of the, with respect to, like, someone making fun of your pigtails is part and parcel of navigating the world, right? So I will often tell parents, we can't protect kids from those everyday hurts, but when those everyday hurts start to stack up and we see patterns and consistencies, then we will put the B word on it. But kids will have small hurts throughout their day and throughout their schooling. It's about building the allies, it's about building resilience, and it's about getting help to guide yourself through when you hear these words, or when so trying to make it a more educational piece, rather than, because they come to me and they want the consequence, because I'm the consequence person. So they get disappointed when what they get instead of a consequence is a restorative conversation with the kids in the room. Because we always want kids at the middle school level, especially, to have an opportunity to make it right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, just to kind of reiterate, or like put in an extra emphasis on that you commented about the restorative approach. I think that ties back so much to this significance of building empathy, and the ways that listening to other stories, reading other stories can help students build a different empathy. and can help parents build that empathy too. Right? That's part of what can become the fabric of a community that is something to restore too, because you're creating each opportunity, you're creating that renewed sense of what it means to be in community with other people.
Right. And I think the parent fear is real. I don't understate that, but it is interesting. Everyone's jumping to suicide together. So we try and support the parent in that as well. And it's a real fear. I understand it. But it's a rare occurrence. It still is. So we try and talk them through that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to go to the last slide. We'll be putting all of these links in the in the webinar sidebar, and you can link to all these stories on Facing History and Listenwise. These are some other amazing links to help you create the reflective classroom, set safe and engaging schools. All these links and recordings you can be found at the link over to the right. And also, we're going to have another webinar next month looking at how we can cover current events in our classroom using some of the Facing History resources and curriculum. We love bringing together great audio storytelling and Facing History and Ourselves resources because they are such a wonderful pairing of how to look at the world through a particular lens, and then how to structure positive classroom conversations around that. So I'm going to just conclude the webinar now by thanking Mary Hendra of Facing History very much for collaborating with Listenwise on this, and also to you, Jennifer, for chiming in and being our voice from the front office and the classroom. We really appreciate it. And
welcome.
Thanks to all of those who attended.
Monica, just as a last note, my school is actually a Listenwise school. So the district that I work in has really jumped in. So it's really exciting for us. But we're thinking we piloted in some classrooms last year, and then this year we're trying to look at it. I mean, one of the reasons I'm intrigued by this is that to use it for school-wide lessons like this one, rather than, in our English classes and in history, but kind of using the resource a little differently.
Right. I'm so happy to hear that, because we do, have a collection that's very focused on content. But what we're trying to do with Facing History and webinars such as this is to highlight these other ways to use the collection to build empathy, to build understanding, and in addition to just building content. What's the name of your school, Jennifer?
It's Toll Middle School in Glendale.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for working with us. And everyone, we appreciate you attending, and all those who listen later. We hope you learned a lot about how to build a safe and reflective classroom during Bullying Month, Anti-Bullying Month. So thanks everyone for attending.